here sitting again with my good friend, Brian Tubbs, a pastor, a teacher, a writer, a blogger, an author, a blabbermouth. I don't know. What should we call you? We've been friends for years. We always love a good discussion. And today's topic is this idea, what seems to be a new idea, as they say, of deconstructionism, the ex-vangelical movement. I grew up in church, as I think you did too, and it seems like if you've been around, it's really not a new phenomena. I think when we grew up, our pastor called it good old-fashioned backsliding, is what we used to call it. But now it's been rebranded as this sort of deconstruction of the faith. I'm reminded of stories in the Bible like Jonah. God called Jonah to go to Nineveh. He took off another direction, and the storms ensued, and everybody around him, cornered him. And Jonah could have sat there saying, well, I'm going through a deconstruction period, and I'm trying to reassess my faith. Or, no, he's just running away from God. That's really what's happening. I know Peter, when he got cornered as Jesus was being arrested, he got turned up, and, he started to deny that he ever knew Jesus. We all know that he did. We all know that he knew better. But he was really just trying to fit in a crowd that, well, his faith didn't fit in. And so he claimed he didn't know it, didn't believe it, and didn't know it. So again, it's not really new, is it? Is it progressive to be a deconstructionist? Where did this come from? Does it have a history? What do you think about this thing?
So, as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. So, and that's very true. I mean, you can go back to the Garden of Eden, and you've got some deconstructionism, so to speak, going on right there. When the serpent asked Eve, "Did God really say?" And so broadly speaking, the Word of God, the truths of God, have been questioned, scrutinized, attacked, mocked from the very beginning. So there really is nothing new. And people who go to church have always had crises of faith, things like that, where they wonder, where do I stand? I mean, you've mentioned a few even in Bible times, where they all had this crisis of faith, So what I think is newish about this is a couple things. One, Christianity since the Middle Ages has come under attack from two fronts, very, very broadly speaking: modernism and postmodernism. And modernism is basically the critique from science and the critique from, well, we just know better. I mean, the Bible just does not line up with the facts, kind of thing. And then the critique from postmodernism is basically, postmodernism, it's almost hard to define based on its nature, but it's essentially skepticism toward any narrative, any truth claim. Deconstructionism was made popular by this philosopher named Jacques Derrida, who came out of the postmodernist school of thought, and he basically postulated that texts don't really have any intrinsic binding meaning on us, that texts are fluid, and because language is fluid, and so he introduced into the academic pantheon this idea that really truth claims are a power game, and that we have to just view text and grand narratives with the most scrupulous questioning, and suspicion. So today, a lot of people have kind of seized on that term, that Derrida made popular. And one of the leading purveyors of this in the religious world is a guy named Richard Rohr, and he's popularized that term in the context of Christianity. Christians need to deconstruct their faith and need to, analyze it and assess it. And are these grand narratives that we've all been taught to believe in, are they really true? And again, this just harks right back to the Garden of Eden. It's like where the serpent says to Eve, "Did God really say?" And that's really the whole Christian deconstructionist phenomena that we're seeing right now. Is essentially, is what I've been taught really true? But there's a lot of motivations going on there and a lot of confusion and I would say chaos. And in many cases, deconstructionism today looks like destruction, and not anything, constructive. The other phenomenon I think that's amping all this up is social media. I mean, it's just everyone has a microphone now. Anyone who has internet access can get out there, and so now, and sadly, in our day and age, well, I'm not sure this is anything new either, frankly, but it's just, again, social media's amped it all up. But people would rather listen to a celebrity, and if a celebrity gets on Instagram, and a lot of this has happened, gets on Instagram and says, "I no longer believe in God. I no longer believe in this," then we'll flock to that. Oh man, I mean, Britney Spears came out recently and said she's an atheist, and her explanation basically is because her children are mistreating her from her point of view. And I'm not, here to expound on Britney Spears' sad situation. That's the kind of emotion-driven thinking that's going on right now, and it's not a healthy thing.
Well, it's not healthy, but in some cases, maybe it is. I mean, deconstruction can be a good thing in the sense of reverse engineering something, taking something apart, putting it back together. I have a kid that likes to take his sandwiches apart and see what's in it and then put it back together and eat it. So is there a time and is there, say, a proper context for a Christian to, deconstruct it and put it back together, see how this thing works?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at 1 Thessalonians 5, where Paul says, "Despise not prophesying, test all things, hold on to what is good." So if that's the exercise we're talking about, then yeah, I think that's very helpful. I mean, you could make the argument that Martin Luther was a deconstructionist. You can make the argument that Saul of Tarsus became a deconstructionist when he was on the road to Damascus. He literally saw the light, and it caused him to reevaluate his views. So in no way am I suggesting that it's bad for Christians to evaluate or even reevaluate what they believe in. I think there's healthy there's a healthy need for that. It's how you do it, and today what I'm seeing more often than not is an emotion-driven process rather than a thought-driven process or a wisdom-driven process. Today people when they deconstruct things, it's like they take a wrecking ball to it, and they're very reactive and very postmodernist, dare I say, and they're relativistic in their thinking. And then I'm sure we're going to get to this later, but then they'll often turn around and yet assume this position of objective superiority over others who don't have the same enlightenment that they do. Right. But yet they're standing on thin air to begin with, Right. So it's unhealthy. My dad, when he was a kid, I say kid, teenager, very young adult, he was a car guy. He was a car nut, and so now this is all before my time. I came along later when he was in the family, vehicle stage, but he used to have like an MG, he had a Corvair, he had a 1965 Corvette convertible. I still wish he would have had that to pass on to me, but he gave it up to marry my mom, so I guess that was a good deal, but for fun, he used to go to his cousin's house or his friends' houses, and he would disassemble the car engine, and then he would put it back together again with his buddies. Now, I personally wouldn't consider that fun. I mean, you and I are good friends, and if you ever said, "Hey, Brian, let's get together next weekend, let's just take apart our cars and put them back together again," I would find something else to do, I think. But that's something that he enjoyed doing, but it taught him about how the car works and stuff. Now, today cars there's some computers and all that involved, so it's a whole different ballgame now. But back then, he was able to work on his car and fix things by himself because he knew pretty much how the car worked. And I think that's healthy for Christians to really, look at what do I believe and then why do I believe it? And am I wrong in some things that I believe? I think that's very healthy and that's important. But there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to go about it.
So as Christians who have to engage in conversations with all types of people, certainly we all have deconstructionists in our circle of influence, in our families, some even sitting in our churches right now, that are ready to throw it all out and question everything. Um, there are a lot of different techniques and a lot of different appeals you can make, say, to someone who is a Muslim or someone who is from another faith or someone who is of no faith, someone who's a skeptic, an atheist, you know, grappling with the philosophical, deeper questions of life and death and things like that, good and evil and purpose. There are a number of inroads and appeals, even on just a rational human instinctive level, to have those conversations with people as you relate them back to the gospel of Jesus.
Right.
But when you're talking to one of these guys, it's a little different. I mean,
Yeah.
these are kids who grew up in church. They grew up in Christian schools. They went to Bible colleges. They're not coming from a point of just, you know, dare I say, ignorance,
Right.
so to speak. They may actually know the Bible better than some of our church folks do.
Yeah.
They may have very well thought through
Yeah.
viewpoints, even if they are only from a surface or academic level. Not, they may not want to go deep spiritually. We'll get
Right.
into that in a few minutes. But
Yeah.
but as it relates to appealing to them, what advice would you give a Christian, say a parent whose college kid is going through this, or someone you know, in your own church, or you're just trying to talk with somebody who may be on the edge, and they tell you, hey, I'm trying to make sense of this and this and this. For some people, it's political. For some people, it has to do with LGBT issues. It has a lot to do with a lot of different issues. But what's the appeal to that particular person who's struggling there, where you can quote Bible verses? They've heard the Bible verses.
Yeah.
They've been to church. You're not inviting them to church isn't really up their alley,
Right.
So
Yeah.
what are you going to do to appeal to them?
So if we could take some time on this one, this one's a good one. Let me first address the parents side of things. So I believe an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and so I think it is really necessary. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and in the end, he will not depart from it. There's an important, that word train is very important. Parents need to train their children how to think, how to process their emotions, how to pray, how to go on a spiritual journey. Because there will come a point, and there should come a point, where your kids, both of us are parents, where your kids are going to examine their own faith. And that faith has to become their faith, not simply, this is what my parents taught me. And so it is incumbent on parents during those early stages to teach and train their children how to pray, how to think, how to process doubts, how to deal with all these things, so that's essential. The other thing is, there's all kinds of statistics out there that say that parents who raise their children in church, who have their kids in church, those kids, and regardless of all the stories that you hear, and there are some out there where kids get hurt by church and things like that and they walk away, that does happen, but overwhelmingly, statistically, parents that raise their children in church, those kids are almost always still attending church when they're adults, and raising their kids in church. And so if you're a parent and you want to see your grandchildren in church, then have your kids in church and keep them in church, because your children will see your example. And if you Sunday morning comes and you're blowing off church because it's just not that important to you, you'd rather sleep in, watch the ball game, watch Meet the Press. Is that still on? I guess I don't know. Then your kids are going to see that, so that's important. I also want to address one of the things that is causing, if I can call it a crisis, this deconstruction crisis that we're in. One of the things driving it is kids who are fed up with young people, because it is certainly very popular amongst young people. I mean, during millennials, Generation Z, this is where most of that deconstructionism is happening right now. And one of the things driving it is they've been hurt, and they have experienced hypocrisy. And so if you're a parent, I can't tell you how essential it is that you be a positive example for your children, in the home. If your kids see you abusing your spouse, or living one way Sunday in church and then living totally different way the rest of the week. If then your child in their brain development and in what they can understand, they're going to see this church obviously is not working for my family. This Christian thing's not working. And if God's real, why is he letting my dad act like this? Why is he letting him mistreat my mother? And so it really can mess up a child's development. So it is so crucial for parents to have the integrity to walk out their faith, and live their faith. Now, no one's perfect, and I'm not trying to beat up on parents if you make a mistake or you fall short, but have an honest discussion with your kids about that. Then, it's like, hey, I know I've made mistakes and I'm sorry. Be honest with your children. Some of the hardest conversations I've had as a dad is having to go and apologize to my kids because I let them down. But it's important to do that. So from the parent side of things, I just want to emphasize, work on prevention, before it becomes a major issue. Have them in church. Be on top of their lives. I don't necessarily mean like a helicopter parent, but be engaged with them and track where they are, in their thinking process. I'm not holding myself up as a great example in this, but I made it a point to check in with my kids all during now they're grown adults now, but I made it a point to check in with them. Hey, you doing okay in your faith? How are you doing in your prayer life? Or do you have any doubts? I'm here for you. Talk to me. I've been there. I've had doubts too, and so it's important to check in along the way on that, but let's say that the past is the past, and now you're dealing with the present, and your teenager or young adult child is going through a crisis of faith. How do you handle that? And they're caught up on the deconstructionism. I think it is you've got to establish the starting point of that process for them. Like what's driving that? What triggered this crisis? You really got to get to the heart of that, because otherwise, if you're just throwing Bible verses at them or saying, "Hey, come to church with me," then it's just kind of going to bounce off, because it's like, Dad, I've heard this, Mom, I've heard this, so what's driving it? Do they have a friend who is LGBTQ and feels isolated and ostracized from the church, and is that what's driving it? Were they God forbid, abused or something by someone in the church? Did they witness some terrible hypocrisy? Did their Christian friends start bullying them or turning on them? Did they go to a college class and the professor said, "Oh, Christianity is a bunch of baloney," and starts expounding all these facts and they never heard of it before? And so what's driving it? And I think it's important that your child needs to know that you love them more than anything, and these conversations need to take place in a context of love. And also, I think we as parents need to have the courage to sometimes say, "Hey, look, let me go on this journey with you a little bit. If you're reading a book that's caused you to have doubts about your faith, let me read it also, and let's talk about it." But I think a lot of times parents will respond, and I've done this too. I get it. When your child starts to have some doubts or starts to go off the path a little bit, we react in panic and anger on that. And instead of lovingly and patiently engaging with them, we just kind of, one of the things I think also, if I can address the church side, I think churches have a role to play in preparing our young people for this crisis of faith. You and I are big believers in apologetics. That's why we do this discussion like we're having right now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of churches right now that are just not doing any apologetics they're just, we should just believe, we should just have faith. And so it's very frustrating for me when I see in the Bible how we're said, wise people store up knowledge, and how we are supposed to be ready to give an answer. And this is the Bible says these things, and yet Christians ignore that. Oh, I'm just supposed to have faith, and I shouldn't even worry about these questions. I shouldn't even bother with it. And that's just, I'm gonna use a strong language here, but that's just being stupid. and you're asking for kids to just walk away from church and walk away from their Christian parents.
Yeah. So, well, on that note, there are many that have walked away from church and have formulated in such a way that they are doing so on moral grounds.
Yeah.
They are taking the high moral road because this organized religion, these pastors are crooked, they're oppressive, they're trying to control people. We are going to take a stand against that and reject church. We'll even reject the teaching of the Bible. Some would even say, because we have found the real Jesus. We're following the real Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't approve of any of these evangelicals. We know better, per se, than, well, frankly, anyone in the past 2,000 years of church history. And, you know, we will follow Christ, just don't call us Christians. I had a friend who told me one time, I'm the kind of Christian that Christians hate. And I was like, well, let's think about that for a second, you know, and so, you know, there is this certain pride, arrogance, privilege, dare I say, prejudice, and just a certain pomposity to the movement too, where they are kind of now scoffing and looking down on those who would dare teach or believe the Bible, because they now know better. And they're doing it, you know, in the name of the real Jesus, in the name of taking a moral stand against corrupt evangelical religion.
Yes.
So what is the appeal to that as it relates to, you know, having some self-awareness ourselves of, well, you know, what is the state of things, and can morality be found in the mess of evangelicalism?
There's a lot there. So the first thing I would say is that, just to echo what you said at the end, we do need to have self-awareness, and we do need to have humility about all this, because let's be honest, the church has not consistently followed the teachings of Jesus for the last 2,000 years, you know, and the church has made a mess of things quite often, and even well-intentioned Christians often slip up and fall. And so there's always ammunition for the critics of Christianity, and we provide that ammunition, you know. So I think we need to be humble about that and honest about that. That being said, I find that this may be one of the it gets back to the social media thing, and everyone's got a microphone now and everything, and how we're now we're like a dog chasing its tail a lot of times on how we think and process these things. It used to be, prior to the age of the internet and the social media, that you had, and my progressive, quote unquote, progressive left-wing friends are going to hate me to say this, but it used to be that you had elites, so to speak, that were the gatekeepers of society, you know, that they kind of controlled communication in society, if you dominated, I shouldn't say control, but they dominated it. So, you know, there was, from the church, you know, there's still some of this, but, you know, there was an ordination process you had to go through before you were trusted with the pulpit. You know, there was in the news media, you know, you only had a few choices, you know, prior to the internet, and you had to go through years of experience before you were trusted with that news desk, you know, or to be a journalist. In academic world, you had to go through many years before you were able to get up and teach students, and authors, you know, would have to go through the publishing process, you know, and their work would have to be vetted and everything. And so in the old days, which is not that long ago necessarily, but there was a little bit more thought. People, let me put it this way, people had to think before they spoke in the old days more than is the case now. Today, everything is reactive. Everything is instant. Everything is, you know, I have a microphone, I got something to say, and I'm going to say it, and you better listen to me. And to make matters worse, nowadays people tend to flock to influencers who often will say the most radical things or the most outrageous things, or who just happen to be the handsomest, the prettiest, and, you know, whatever. And so we're kind of become more and more shallow as a society. unfortunately, all of that has complicated this entire process. So what should be a healthy process of periodic examination. I mean, Romans 12 talks about how we are to renew our minds, and so it is healthy for Christians to periodically examine what we believe and why we believe it, and to have I taken on more baggage to my beliefs than should be there? We do this a lot. I mean, you and I both have plenty of experiences on this, where we grew up in a church and we're used to hearing sermons preached, and we're used to a certain culture and a certain thing. And then we get a little bit older and we're like, well, that's not really in the Bible, I mean, and so there's a healthy process, and there's a need for that. But unfortunately, we've compounded it with I'm just going to call it this postmodernist age of perpetual outrage and polarization, and where our feelings and our need for a validation is at the front and center. That's not a healthy spot to be in. So to answer your question, when you have a conversation could be with your child, or could be with anyone who's been in the past, been in church, now they consider themselves an ex-vangelical or a progressive Christian, and there's often a big overlap there, or they've walked away. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of time. You have to untangle the web and untangle what led them to that point, and then find out where they're at. So the first thing I would say, ask questions. And we have to be willing to have the patience to ask questions, and then to close our mouth and listen, because we all, even us, we want to talk, and so someone will say something and we'll hear a word or something and we'll jump on that. And you're very good at this. I mean, you've talked about how you've interviewed a lot of people who may not agree with you on different things, but you'll sit there and you'll listen to them. And that means a lot. There's something to be said. I just preached on Sunday in Acts chapter 4 about when Peter and John came upon the man that was begging at the temple, and he was lame, according to the Bible. But when Peter and John approached him, their first words were, "Look at us." So they made eye contact. They fixed their attention on this man. They engaged him. And that's before we can even get to the healing process and the restoration process, we've got to give that person our full attention and engage them and find out where they are at. A good book on this is Tactics by Greg Kokel. It's all about asking questions and just trying to untangle where that person's at. Another thing is, let's not try to win. It's not, our ego gets involved in these conversations. I used to get involved in theological and apologetics debates on social media all the time. But what I found is that when you've got an audience, after a while you start to be like, okay, I got to say this in a way that I look good to the people that are watching this, and right. and that's going on with the other person too. So I've started taking all that offline to where I'll just message them directly, or I'll try to get together like we're talking now. And so there's no audience. This is just you and me talking, because I care about you. Mm-hmm. I don't care about trying to win a debate or trying to win an argument or showboat or virtue signal. Mm-hmm. I care about you. And that's very important. Yeah. And once all that's established, to get to what you were also, I mean, you had a question that packed a lot of stuff in there. Yeah. So once all that's established, and that foundation is essential, okay? Humility, attention, focus, not trying to win, engaging the person where they're at, really understanding them. Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, then to be understood. All of that's critical. Then when it comes to that person making a judgment about your faith and about the Bible, about Christianity, and thinking that they know better than 2,000 years of history, what I find frustrating, and I do see this a lot from young people, no offense to the young people watching this discussion, but I see this a lot from young people, and I'm sounding old when I say that. It's like them young whippersnappers, but is this cavalier judgment of older generations, and past generations, and that comes from a quote unquote progressive premise that is twofold. One, It's the Star Trek idealistic idea that we're getting better and better and better and better and better. And so any generation that's come before us by nature is inferior. They're not as progressed as we are. So that's one conceit. And the other conceit is, well, look around us. There's all this pain and suffering, all this scandal and sin. Obviously, that's the fault of the past generations. Our job as young people now on the scene, we got to fix this mess. Mm-hmm. And when the young people start, or the older people start saying, well, wait a minute, hold on, then there's this instinctive reaction from younger people. Well, no, you've had your chance. Look at the mess you've created. And but what young people today don't get, and they won't get until they get older, mm-hmm. There's still going to be a mess when they're older. And their kids are going to come and say the same thing. Because the problem is not with the generations. The problem is with you and me, with people. Right. We're the mess. And so everyone has to eat humble pie here. Everyone's got to be humble. Everyone's got to look in the mirror. Everyone's got to have self-awareness. Because Christians aren't the only one with scandals and corruption and hypocrisy.
Really?
There's plenty of that to go around in every avenue, in every area of society. Christians need to be self-reflective, but I would argue that churches, Christianity, if I can say that term broadly speaking, we have more police mechanisms within our structure than most of the world does. I mean, we have a church discipline process that's called out in the Bible. And we've seen that played out recently in the news when a mega church pastor was just disciplined by the elders of his church and put on leave, because of inappropriate texting relationship with a woman that wasn't his wife. And that kind of accountability is essential, and yet the Bible provides for that. And I don't see that a lot in the world today. I don't see that kind of that policing mechanism to deal with corruption and sin. So, but whenever you take it upon yourself to judge someone else, you've got to ask yourself, one, people with glass houses shouldn't throw stones, kind of thing. But two, what's the standard that you're using to judge other people? And I'll shut up after this, but what's the standard that you're using to judge someone else? I mean, okay, if you're a deconstructionist and you're in the school of Derrida and a postmodernist and you believe in that having suspicion and toward any grand narrative or truth claim, then why don't you apply that to yourself? Why is it that these deconstructionists can often be the most arrogant, frankly, and the most conceited in their critique of Christianity? Why not apply that deconstructionism to yourself and your point of view? And so I don't see that humility and that self-awareness, and deconstructionists should be the first. So it's one thing to say, well, I have unanswered questions and this isn't working for me right now, and I need to go on a journey, kind of thing. That's one thing, but it's another thing to sneer at other people and deny them their experience and their faith and say, well, I know better than them. And I just don't know. Not only do I know better than you, I know better than 2,000 years of church history. What's your standard for judging that? So,
well, as we kind of bring this down to a close, I'll put my theory out there. You can shoot it down if you want. I like to think of it, if a person went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, I'm sick," and the doctor said, "Here, take these 3 pills." I mean, this is based on much research, many testimonials. People who have your sickness, they take these 3 pills and it heals them. I'm telling you, take these 3 pills. Now go home and do it. For that person to go home and sit there and then, quote, do their own research and think it through and then refuse to take those pills because, well, this doctor is trying to control me and he's oppressing me by telling me such and such right. and such and such. That is not a particularly intellectual move.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, number one, you're still sick.
Yeah.
You didn't help anything.
Yeah.
Number two, you didn't try it for yourself.
Yeah.
So Christianity to me is a highly personal pragmatic. It's an experiential faith. It's not simply something you memorize. It's not simply something you read and just accept to be true.
Yeah.
It is actually an engaging relationship where you experience actual healing, restoration, hope, transformation, on and on and on and on for yourself.
Right.
Not to sound coy or rude, but to the person who is deconstructing their faith, my first question is, did you really try it for yourself? And more often than not, I wonder how many would admit, actually, no. They were just told what the medicine was.
Right.
They know all about the pills the doctor said to take, but they never actually experienced the transformation. They never experienced the restoration themselves. They were never healed.
Right.
So they're still sick.
Yeah.
Again, not to sound rude, but don't tell me the medicine doesn't work if you never took it yourself.
I couldn't agree more.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I mean, and that I think, again, I'm all for compassion and listening and this, but at a certain point, as Christians, sometimes you just need to call somebody's bluff. And again, as you said, if they're going to think critically about this worldview, think critically about theirs. And you kind of have to give and take a little bit here. But at the end of the day, it's important that we remind the one who is academically or intellectually or philosophically, taking some higher road than our, evangelicalism. Just to put it to them and find out, did you actually try it for yourself? I mean, James says, be hearers and doers of the word, not just hearers only, because in the end, you're not fooling anybody. You're fooling yourself.
That's right.
It's like looking in a mirror and forgetting what you look like and walking away. It's really, for those of us who have experienced the real salvation, it's silly for anybody to say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because we know it works. So that's just a theory. And again, if you have any closing thoughts or anything.
I think that's true. I mean, you've got people who are not being very honest in their deconstruction. You got some people that will critique and ridicule the Bible. They've never read it. Now, let's be honest. There's a lot of Christians that haven't read the Bible, so that's not good.
True.
But you have a lot of people that have walked away from church. Maybe they had, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had a bad experience in that church. Maybe they went to two churches and had terrible experiences in both those churches. And then they judge all churches according to that. There are tens of thousands of churches in America alone. And just because you had a bad experience in 2 or 3 churches does not indict all churches, And the same thing is true. Just because you've heard some bad things about the Bible or seen some social media posts with some controversial Bible verses, if you've not fully read and studied the Bible for yourself, what right do you have to judge the Bible? And even then, when you actually read through the Bible and you go through it and you see some passages in there you don't understand, you can't judge God without at least, first of all, you just can't judge God, period. Okay, I get that. But even if you're going to try to take it upon yourself to judge God, at least try to understand God first. At least try to understand Him. And so, there's a lot of death and destruction in the Old Testament. And there's a lot of controversial laws and rules and regulations that God imposes. But if you remember that the Bible teaches that God is all-knowing, that qualifies Him uniquely to be the ultimate righteous judge. If He knows everything, including everyone's thoughts and intentions and agenda, He knows their past, their present, and the future, then God is uniquely qualified to render judgment on us. And so that's being intellectually honest. It's like, if you're going to judge God, then let's judge the whole package. Let's understand that He is everywhere present. He is all-knowing. He is all-powerful. And the Bible still presents Him as a God of love. And this is something that's difficult for people to understand. But like Jonah, you take Jonah, who definitely represents some of the harsher Christian today, who's he wants death and destruction on Nineveh, even after Nineveh's repented, But yet it's interesting. Jonah didn't refuse to go to Nineveh because he was afraid. Jonah, he makes it very clear. He refused to go to Nineveh because he knew God was a God of grace and mercy, and he didn't believe that they deserved it. And the reality is, God is a whole lot more merciful than people, and a whole lot more gracious than people, including many Christians. And so now let me also say, there are some people out there who are maybe watching this, and they're going to say, well, John Bryan, I am being honest. I do read the Bible, I study it, I pray, but I'm struggling right now. And they might feel like we're attacking them for being insincere. And I think what both of us would say is there's a right way and a wrong way to go about this process, and and I would just simply say, turn toward God, not away from him when you're going through distress. I went through a crisis of doubt myself many years ago, and before I was a pastor and everything. And I heard God speak to me in my mind. It wasn't like an audible voice from heaven, but I heard him clearly speak to me when I was very upset. He said, "Brian, you don't know me well enough to be mad at me." And that got me. And I'm like, God has a point there, And so I really made it a point to just get to know him more and study him more. And Romans 8 talks about how the Spirit bears witness in our spirit that we are the children of God, and that we can go to the Holy Spirit will intercede for us in words that we can't even comprehend. So I know that there are people hurting, and I know there are people that have unanswered questions. I'm not in any way attacking them. I'm just saying, go to God with those questions. The psalmist does that. I mean, David's Psalms. He's always going to God with his emotions. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you take it upon yourself to judge the Bible, to judge 2,000 years of Christian history, to judge God without being honest about that, that's a problem.
So, in summary, deconstructing your faith can be a good thing, a productive thing, and in some respects, a biblical aspect of challenging and holding fast to those things that are good.
Yeah.
Also, in summary, the church could use a little self-awareness and humility and admitting that, hey, we've got questions we don't have good answers to. We've got desires or habits that don't square with our faith, and we're navigating that as well. But also, in summary, encouraging people just to, lean in and try it for yourself.
Yeah.
Don't sit here and dismiss something that you honestly haven't applied to yourself.
Yes.
And just lean in and ask God to help you find the right way.
And in that, applying it to yourself, just because you go to church doesn't mean you fully applied this, really, it's a relationship. I guess if I could close, Romans 10 tells us, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It is a heart thing. You're making a conscious, deliberate, intentional declaration. You're choosing to put your faith and trust in Jesus, not a church, not an institution, not people, but in Jesus. And I think a lot of people that are deconstructing their faith are doing so because they never really put their faith in Jesus to begin with. They put their faith in other things. Well, other things will let you down. Other people will let you down. Jesus will never let you down.